It's like Sophie's Choice, picking which one of you to go first, but I will just go in order. Frank Figliuzzi, you first.
Yeah, look, what's developing here is a crisis of credibility. And I fear that the senior-most leaders at FBI and even at other intel agencies, as we continue to learn, like every day, who knew what when, and that it was a lot more than we thought they knew at the time preceding January 6th, I fear that those leaders are not grasping the gravity of this moment in terms of the future of their organizations. What I mean by this is it's time for complete transparency. It's time to come out and say, we dropped this ball and here's why. But when we have Chris Wray, for example, 6 months after January 6th, testifying on the Hill that they lacked specific intelligence indicating violence or a breach of the Capitol, when we have just days after January 6th, the head of the Washington field office calling a press conference saying he lacked specific intelligence about violence in the Capitol, something's very wrong, because we're just learning, even in the last 24 hours, about new material obtained from the January 6th committee from Secret Service that they knew that the FBI was briefing the law enforcement community, even regular briefings in the days preceding January 6th, and even every 2 hours the night before January 6th. So which is it? You lack specificity, or you had the intelligence to do something and somehow it didn't happen? And I think it's going way up the chain here, even to involve political suppression of anybody who might have wanted to take further actions to secure the Capitol. Those are the questions that need to be answered, and they need to be answered now, not waiting for the committee to release a 1,000-page report months from now.
Do you agree, Frank Figliuzzi, with the assessment from these two former senior FBI officials that Christopher Wray is to blame for creating a vacuum, for not articulating a clear vision?
I think if you watch his testimony, and look, people know I've written a book called The FBI Way. Every time he testifies, I pay close attention. I look for fulsome, responsive answers, and I don't yet see that happening. So if the laws need to be changed, if the Attorney General guidelines on conducting domestic terror investigations need to be changed, come out and say it. But he hasn't said it. If they dropped the ball because somebody at the White House told them, don't take action to enhance security at the Capitol, don't pound your fist on the table for Capitol Police to do something, then say it. But we're not hearing it yet, and it's eroding the credibility of the institution. That's why so many agents are saying this is painful. We can't take the beating every day and appear to be political, but yet they've become politicized.
I want to show our work. The work of the FBI is important to every one of us, and you are three veterans of this agency. So let me show you the evidence that the January 6th committee developed and presented to the public about what the FBI knew prior to January 6th, and then I'll show what Frank's talking about, Christopher Wray's testimony on the same topic.
The FBI, U.S. Capitol Police, Metropolitan Police, and other agencies all gathered and disseminated intelligence suggesting the possibility of violence at the Capitol prior to the riot. In this report, received on December 26th, the Secret Service field office relayed a tip that had been received by the FBI. According to the source of the tip, the Proud Boys planned to march armed into D.C. On the evening of January 5th, the Secret Service learned during an FBI briefing that right-wing groups were establishing armed QRFs, or Quick Reaction Forces, readying to deploy for January 6th. Groups like the Oath Keepers were standing by at the ready should POTUS request assistance. By invoking the Insurrection Act, agents were informed.
And here's Christopher Wray's testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee on June 23rd, 2021. Where he's asked specifically about the intelligence about violence at the Capitol.
What we did not have, to my knowledge at least, is intelligence indicating that hundreds and hundreds of people were going to breach the Capitol complex. That, to my knowledge, we did not have.
So Andrew Weissmann, again, the most generous interpretation is that even if the FBI alerted the Secret Service on the evening of January 5th that far right-wing groups, including the Oath Keepers, were coming, they may not have known it was hundreds, right? There may have been a discrepancy in the number. But certainly any reasonable person understood from Christopher Wray's testimony that it was an intelligence failure. And we know that's simply not true. It was not. And I guess in my reporting this out, you brought this to the attention of my viewers on the day of the hearing, but I hadn't dug in enough to give it the time it deserved. And my colleague Ken Delamian did this fantastic reporting, and that's why we're getting it today. But the point is that this is right under the surface. I mean, I didn't make a ton of calls, and all three of you know a lot more people than I do, but it is right under the surface that there is deep and grave concern from people who care very much about the institution of the FBI and everybody in that workforce who think that Christopher Wray has created a vacuum by saying nothing.
Well, so one, I completely agree with Frank in his criticism, and it's important to know that you have three people on right now who care deeply about the FBI and the institution. And I hate to put more work on Merrick Garland and Lisa Monica's plate, but the FBI is a part of the Department of Justice. Many people don't realize that, but they report directly into the Deputy Attorney General and the Attorney General. And Chris Wray had a very different response to the Black Lives Matter protests over the summer, where they were all over it. The deputy director, of the FBI said this was the most significant domestic terrorism event facing the Bureau. That was the Black Lives Matter protests. And yet, when January 6th happened, the FBI really was asleep at the switch, and it wasn't an intelligence failure. It was a failure to act on the intelligence that they had. And I find that Chris Wray's testimony was exactly what you do not want from public officials. It lacked candor and fulsomeness in saying what exactly they knew and where their failures were. How do you expect an institution to become better and to make sure this doesn't happen again if you don't have leaders who are going to be willing to acknowledge what went wrong and to figure out how to fix it? I do think that it is a huge problem that Chris Wray is, I think, really not showing the correct leadership. And that means that it really falls to the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General to hold him to account for that failure.
So, Pete Strzok, the statement that I read in the setup was from the FBI Agents Association, and the irony isn't lost on me. The defense to what was unearthed in this memo is that agents are allowed to have personal opinions. Oh, really? I want to know what you make in terms of sort of your ear to the ground, what you're hearing is going on, and what you make of, we live in a country where even FBI employees are granted the protections of the First Amendment. That's not what this story is about. That's not what this conversation is about. This is about two former senior FBI officials saying that Christopher Wray, by failing to fill the vacuum, is failing to sort of point the ship of the FBI in the direction of insurrection bad. Prosecuting insurrection is good. And that in that vacuum, a whole lot of sympathy for the insurrectionists has flourished.
Well, Nicole, I think it's an important point to make that the vast, overwhelming majority of FBI employees, agents, analysts, professional staff have political opinions, and every single day they come in, they put those aside, and they honor their oath to the Constitution. The fact is that I think you do have a small number, and I was going to say this initial email that was published was in the days and weeks following the insurrection, and some people not in D.C. might just simply watching that footage say, oh, well, this was a riot that got out of control. What concerns me is what you reported, that even now, recently, that there might be anybody who would think that this was just some sort of riot that got out of control, that isn't aware of these multiple complex conspiracies that were going on weeks and months prior to the insurrection, that there weren't these fake slates of electors that were being ginned up and planned months before January 6th. That, to me, points to a leadership failure. You have got to have some ability to tell the workforce, to educate the workforce in unequivocal terms about what's going on. Now, we don't know what's going on inside the hallways of the FBI. I suspect all employee emails would hear something, whether us on the panel or whether leaks to the media, people would say something about it. What concerns me is the only thing I've heard talking about political opinions recently is some people on the right getting Director Wray to say some poor agent who liked on Twitter a Washington Post editorial about Bill Barr, that Wray admits that he finds that concerning. And I would say, I agree with Andrew about the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General being involved, but I also think internal change is hard. And that's why we have things like inspectors general. That's why we have things like congressional oversight. I have yet to see, and I assume that the Inspector General is doing some sort of look at the FBI's response to January 6th. But when I look back at the appearances that senior FBI officials have had, I've been stunned, frankly, at the lack of really piercing, substantive, hard questions about what the FBI did or didn't do. And to Frank's point, that's not only important because what happened, we've had midterm elections with a whole host of election deniers on the ballot coming up in a month and a half here. In 2 years after that, we've got another presidential election where an entire party is basing their platform on denying any result other than Donald Trump or the Republican nominee getting elected. This is a problem going forward, and we've got to get our hands around it.